Hi, folks. My name is John Friedlander. Together with my collaborator, Gloria Hemsher, we're going to do a series of YouTube videos. She's going to cover advanced issues in women's energy. And there are some really exciting advanced energies for women. And I'm going to cover a wide range of topics growing out of my studies with Jane Roberts of Seth fame in the 1970s, and with one of the first teaching psychics, Louis Bostwick of the Berkeley Psychic Institute, also in the mid-70s. Today, I guess we're, because I often channeling, and perhaps my cat will join the program. He's walking around here, and I find him delightful. So today we're going to cover Seth's theory of reincarnation and implications of it that certainly weren't clear to me in the 70s, even though it was right there in Seth Speaks and perhaps in subsequent books. And these implications, I think, provide an entry into what is really radical about Seth's materials. I cannot express how mind-boggling it was to be introduced to Seth in 1972. There was nothing so down to earth and yet very, very different from our understanding of how things worked and what was the meaning of a spiritual journey. Even so, I think in one of his early books, someplace, Seth said that we would be attracted, that you would be attracted, meaning us, to his material for the wrong reasons, maybe not wrong reasons, but for reasons that didn't arise out of a deep understanding of what he was really teaching. Again, everyone I was interacting with seemed to understand the central message of Seth to be, you create your own reality according to your conscious beliefs. And by exploring your conscious beliefs, you would be able to create a reality that made you happy. It wasn't that easy. I don't know anyone for whom it's as easy as that sounds or straightforward. because reality is meant to be bigger than you can control. And so, relatively early, 2-3 years into it, I began understanding that while we create our reality, we don't control it. No matter how skillful we get at working with our beliefs, reality just has too much intrinsic creativity, too much spiritual balance to it. As one channeled being said to me several decades ago, everyone wants to be spontaneous, you just don't want to be surprised. But surprise is an intrinsic part of reality. It's what makes reality give you back more than you put into it. This is shown in the Taoist symbol where the yin penetrates the yang and the yang penetrates the yin, where the unknown arises in intrinsic operation with the known. And if you create more and more known, you simultaneously create more and more potential for the new and unexplored, in other words, the unknown. So over the decades, I've come to understand that pretty much everything that Seth said had been said by other people, or at least understood by people like the Tibetan Buddhist. But the meaning that they made out of it was radically different from the meaning that Jane and Seth made out of the material. And Seth's approach in some ways reversed the normal spiritual journey. And I think is the ground for the Aquarian Age. Prior to Seth, the emphasis has tended to be, and is still tends to be, that people are born into human incarnation because they're ignorant of how things really work. Seth, properly understood, has us born into physical incarnation in order to willingly suspend disbelief. We intentionally become ignorant of our already pre-existing non-dual and blissful consciousness at the soul and Hindu Atman level. So that we can explore tensions and contradictions and create new experiences that are simply not possible in the soul's own realm. When we understand Seth's theory of reincarnation, which we're going to explore today, I think we understand the nature of creativity, and that one way of saying it, and I think Seth said this in this way in the books. If not, I think it's a fair description. All consciousness expands in all directions. So what does that mean? Let me tell a few stories. I was talking to a client, an artist. Actually, both of these stories are about visual artists, about painters. And she was wondering if I saw her becoming a well-known artist. And I did, just not in this lifetime. And she said, with some bitterness, I think, what good does that do me? I do all this work and some future incarnation gets the benefit of it. And I think that's practically everyone's understanding, that when you die, you lose your subjectivity, you lose continuity. In fact, the Tibetans are quite clear that you break up into multiple parts. And they even talk about the fact that the continuous reincarnational process, that their tulkus, that their spiritual masters maintain, is rare. It is a specialized process by which they create a vehicle that holds together that consciousness across incarnations, so that the splitting in many directions doesn't occur. And the explicit statement is that for the rest of us, we just get blown into various parts that go into various directions, and that our subjectivity that seems to have continuity while we have a physical body doesn't. Seth's approach, where all consciousness expands in all directions, when understood, actually changes the understanding of what happens when we die. And I will try to explain how, even though our consciousness does go in multiple directions after we die, and our body is not providing the apparent continuity that it does to our subjectivity. Even so, in ways that I will try to explain, there are portions of us that continue very personally. And in those portions, we each experience both individual continuity with dramatic changes, of course. I like to joke that death changes people. But your growth with your subjectivity at a personality level, not just a soul level, continues infinitely, both inside and outside of time. How does it do that? Well, let me break away from the story of the two artists and discuss how the personality, not just the soul, but the personality, what you think of as the private and personal you, continues infinitely. So in Seth Speaks, Seth's second major book, Seth talks about a prior incarnation of his that was a minor and somewhat lost in history Pope of the Catholic Church. At least 1,000 years earlier than when Seth Speaks was written. And Seth talks about how there are some memories of this Pope that Seth doesn't personally have access to, even though they are past incarnations of his, that he would have to go find that Pope who had continued to grow in his own self to get those particular meanings, particular memories. So it was clear that, and Seth would often in classes, and I think in some of the other books, talk about how, in one sense, Jane Roberts, the channel for Seth, was a past incarnation of Seth, but that in her future, when she, quote unquote, became Seth, that Seth would be something more and Jane would be her own version of Seth. Seth is trying to explain the simultaneity of time in ways that we with physical bodies who experience time in a linear fashion are never fully going to understand. And so, in some sense, all these things he says are just metaphors. So I did not really begin to appreciate how significant what Seth was saying about his Pope self or his Jane Roberts self continuing to grow in their own directions until I saw my own dear friend, Will Ives, who committed suicide, unfortunately, in 1974. And clairvoyantly, in the early to mid 90s, I saw something that led me to understand the continuity of consciousness very directly in a very real way. I was meditating one afternoon or morning, and all of a sudden I see this gorgeous purple violet helix, just this ribbon of light. It was not just gorgeous, but it had a wonderful energy, and I knew it was my friend Will, which kind of shocked me because I also knew that Will had had earlier reincarnations, after his death in 1974. So this was 76. So this was maybe 18 years after his death. This helical, beautiful ribbon of light and consciousness was unmistakably my friend Will, but much calmer, deeper, more aware, just more fullness and richness that my friend Will had never had when physically incarnated. And it became clear to me that those subsequent incarnations had somehow or other been folded into Will. So, like I had had 18 or so more years of experience, he had had lifetimes more experience. It's not in linear time, so it's hard to say exactly how long. And as I continued to observe him, and I guess he was communicating to me, I began to see how he had, after death, consulted with his guides and other incarnations from the same, what the Theosophists call causal soul, which is kind of the center of reincarnations. And all of them together had decided to participate in a brand new incarnation. And so a new baby soul, a new created soul, and again, time messes up our concepts here because it's not happening in linear time. But in the most important sense, a new personality of the soul is created to own this new baby that's going to be born. And other incarnations, like my friend Will, went into an individual like suspended animation, like in science fiction when someone is traveling for years in spacecraft. But this suspended animation was a deep trance. So my friend Will went into a deep trance and became a significant portion of the subconscious or unconscious of the new child. And from this deep trance, he would participate as a portion of the new child's subconscious and as an influence to that child, and as part of the richness of that child's experience. But from the center of his own trance, he was experiencing very directly, not the way he would have if he'd had a physical body, outside of time and weaving meaning in ways that maybe you could say are more like music than a textbook. Just weaving meaning and light and colors and working with those colors and reacting to those colors and learning how to work through issues that my friend Will had had when he was physically incarnated, that he wasn't complete and done with. So Will did that, and he did at least one other until he was able to work through enough of his own issues that he had his own multidimensional center. He was still a portion of his causal soul. The causal souls are so immense. But his personality had its own multidimensional center, which is what the Hindu sages call the Atman. But this is a much more multidimensional version than the Hindu sages seem to describe. And from there, all creativity breaks loose, breaks open. And Will was clearly engaged in many different things simultaneously, some of which I couldn't track, and some of which I could, some of which he was doing essentially by himself, and some of which in teams, and some of which in huge gestalts. And one of the things he did, and it's now at least 25 years, is he stepped into the back of my subconscious and has been somewhat present there ever since. I'm not usually paying attention to that. But from time to time, he probably has his own opinions, and there is a kind of intimacy and sharing that goes on, even as the soul that Will was a part of has incarnated in at least one long and continuous location. So there are several things to draw from this. One is that all consciousness expands in all directions, that your personality is eternal. And whatever this means, it's so eternal that it's eternal outside of time. I guess in some sense, this universe is slated to end in trillions of years or something. But even there, you don't end, because there are other dimensions where we each have consciousness that is outside of time. Time is an energy, it's a constraint, it's a point of view that we voluntarily take to have experiences that we can't have outside of the one dimension of time that we experience here in physical reality. Now, what that means, I can't even begin to imagine, because I have a neurological structure which is built to hardwire me into linear time. So each of you continue. What's more, each of us, eventually work through all our stuck points. There's always more adventures and, in some sense, tensions and contradictions, but they expand in all directions, not just the next incarnation, but in probable directions, into group consciousnesses, inside of time, outside of time, backward in time, forward in time, in every direction imaginable, in ever-growing flow and happiness. So my experience is that people tend to carry over constrictions after death, which eventually they work through the ones that are really constricting, and everyone, even people who commit acts of extraordinary evil, everyone is eventually redeemed through experience. For someone like Hitler, it might be 20 million years on other planets with all kinds of unpleasant, but nevertheless healing experiences. And there is no one so awful that they don't get it eventually. And a few incarnations kind of get it quite quickly. So I'd like to talk about a couple of those. I'd like to start talking about John Coltrane, the great jazz musician. In 1969, I was an atheist. The idea that there could be an all-powerful, all-knowing God who allowed suffering seemed so completely wrong that that agnosticism did not seem like a possibility. That it was apparent that the universe was meaningless. This was the 60s, and one night I was on acid listening to John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. And it just turned my mind inside out, and I started listening to it and started reading some of the spiritual material that echoed John Coltrane. And within months, I was practicing yoga and yoga meditation. And that's been my journey. Very spiritual practices have been my journey ever since. So John Coltrane is really very important to me personally. Several years ago, I was writing an introduction for my friend and publisher, Richard Grossinger, who's a prolific writer. And in the introduction, I was talking about how Richard's books remind me of Coltrane. And as I'm thinking this and I'm sort of thinking about Richard and his books, and I see this big guide of Richard's. And out of this big guide pops a much smaller portion of this big guide. And who is it but John Coltrane, who died in the mid-60s. So Coltrane kind of stepped back and became part of my subconscious the way that Will had done. Now, I can't imagine that I have the kind of relationship with Coltrane that I had with Will, and I don't track it. But anytime I do think back to this, I can see, well, there's a sort of scent of, like turkey on Thanksgiving, a sort of wafting of John Coltrane and his own incredibly creative self participating in his own utterly unique way, amongst 10 million other things he's doing? Who knows? Recently, a long-term student of mine died of brain cancer, just about a month ago, if that. But already, very rapidly, within a few days, she had moved into something kind of like what Coltrane and Will have done, where she hasn't become part of me the way they did, but she's part of something bigger, with a sense of herself, and I do from time to time interact with her, but not as inside of me, but as outside of me. But she tracks herself as a lady, as that subjective self, even as she is actively participating in something much bigger. So she has something rich, fabulous, ecstatic even, without losing the personal, the private, the Eleni. There's a very real appreciation for that self, which, rather than getting smaller as she gets bigger, I can tell is getting bigger as she gets bigger. That this personal, small personality self that walked on two legs, that laughed, that cried, that this is continuing to grow. So I'll return to the artist, to the second artist story. So one of my friends and long-term students is a great artist. And we were talking about when her artwork would be adequately appreciated. And she's about my age, and I'm no youngster. And she said, well, it better happen soon, because I'm old. I forget her exact words. And I found myself quipping, even death is not a deadline. That in a way that would matter to her personally, that those paintings would find, that creativity of hers would find a full and rich expression that was known in ways that would more than satisfy that would maybe surprise, but completely fulfill and maybe go way beyond what she would imagine is fulfillment by its meaningfulness, not something to be appreciated by some subsequent incarnation rather than her. May be appreciated by a subsequent incarnation, but definitely appreciated by her in ways that retain her individuality. Now, I said at the beginning that people like the Tibetan Buddhist and my teacher, Louis Bostwick, they knew about this kind of trance investigation. Louis is dead, the advanced Tibetan practitioners know. But both Louis and the advanced Tibetan practitioners try to sever that relationship when they find it. So that because they're concerned that the quote unquote past incarnation has too much impact on the personality that Lewis's phrase was owns the body, that was made brand new for that new physical body incarnation, and will itself be eternal and grow in all directions. Unless you view this interaction from outside of time and from a location where you're not just tracking the personality that owns the body, but you're tracking multiple directions in simultaneous time the way Seth does, you won't notice the fact that each of those subjectivities, those so-called past incarnations, are the center of their own dynamic exploration and add a sacred richness to the physically incarnated personality. And that as we move into the Aquarian age, instead of focusing so strongly on the one personality that becomes enlightened or becomes a great writer or artist or tech billionaire, that we will understand more directly the value of our interdependence. Our interdependence, our being interwoven with all kinds of consciousnesses, does mean that we can never control everything in our experience. But it also means that our experience has a rambunctious, as Jane Roberts would have said, a rambunctious and idiosyncratic creativity that sparkles and expands in all directions. and everything contributes to it. My hope and expectation is that as we begin to understand this, that we learn how to relax and open to life as it is, become more resilient in the face of pain, and come to recognize that the universe does not inflict pain as punishment, but as a kind of healing, because pain is where we find barriers to our full self-expression. And when we experience pain, it isn't really that the outside is causing us pain so much as it's disclosing pre-existing pain. So as we become aware of the intrinsic and ever-expanding creativity of every moment and of our own eternal safety and security in the fact that we grow in infinite directions, and that as time goes on, we experience more and more secure happiness, that we will learn to relax, open to life, generate a more authentic kindness and generosity, a more secure happiness, and really begin to understand the fundamental creativity of every moment and every action. So, hopefully, there will be many more talks to follow. Please subscribe and hit like, and hopefully we'll be speaking again. Thank you.